So as we saw, the deep cleaning that the city of San Francisco ultimately ended up having when Xi Jinping and a bunch of CEOs were coming to town, and Gavin Newsom actually said the quiet part out loud, which is, of course we're going to clean up for these foreign dignitaries and CEOs. We're having guests over.
Folks say, oh, they're just cleaning up this place because all those fancy leaders are coming into town. That's true. Because it's true.
And by the way, we found out throughout the course of the story that they could do that at any point in time. It didn't require any additional allocation of funds. I think it's important to examine what's going on in other parts of California, because the filth, the rot, the problems that they're dealing with are completely out of hand. And one of the problems that we've touched on a few times on this channel is the fact that these homeless encampments are crazy fire hazards that ultimately end up leading to damage of critical infrastructure. And a perfect example of this is the fire on the I-10 freeway, a very busy thoroughfare in California that 300,000 cars move across on the daily, that actually connects the east side of Los Angeles to the west side of Los Angeles, is now out of commission indefinitely due to this mega blaze that has made it structurally unsound. Now, we're going to get into this, but before we do, I want to say thank you to everybody who signed up. actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
And thank you to the podcast listeners, Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform.
Part of one of the nation's busiest highways is shut down indefinitely after a fast-burning weekend fire under I-10 in California. Officials believe arson is to blame. Miguel Almaguer has late details.
The photos and videos of this blaze underneath the I-10 freeway are absolutely insane to average, everyday, normal, rational people. However, if you live in the state of California and you're seeing increases in fires in homeless encampments, increases in fires in homeless encampments that are under highways, this is only unique in its severity by comparison to what you're normally used to, because these encampments are objectively fire hazard. People have been warning about them for a long time. There have been terrible fires going on in California for years.
Gusty wind fueled the flames that burned through this home in Riverside. But the fire was started at a homeless encampment created in between two sound walls behind the 60 freeway.
This is my living room.
One of her neighbors told her just how bad it got.
And I said, but what about my house? And he said it's gone too. And I lost it. I couldn't.
She couldn't come to terms with the loss, especially since she had just retired from a long career as a school bus driver and just paid to repair her windows and her roof.
Right after my retirement, I thought I was going to have my house. I have relax, getting what I wanted to relax and keep going. And then it's like somebody just pulled the rug from under my feet.
And even Gavin Newsom, when he's pretending to do something, says that he's pretending to do something about this. However, the way that this is being covered and talked about by Gavin Newsom has nothing to do with the encampment that, by the way, was still under that portion of the I-10 overpass. It's all about this arson, that somebody set this fire intentionally. This was done with intent. A criminal set this fire.
In our press conference, we relayed that we would likely complete at 6 a.m. this morning the preliminary investigation as to the cause of the fire that led to the conditions you see behind me. The fire marshal, who will speak in a moment after the mayor and a number of other speakers, they finished that investigation up about 12 hours early, and they made a preliminary determination. There was malice intent.
With no regard to who would be the most likely suspect in this particular fire, which would be somebody in the homeless encampment or somebody who is related to and or targeting the homeless encampment, thus putting the issue at the feet of Karen Bass.
There is no reason to assume that the origin of this fire or the reason this fire happened was because there were unhoused individuals nearby.
And Gavin Newsom and all of these California officials who have deemed that the homeless have a divine right to camp, create fire hazards, tear up cities, set fires whenever they want, and all these other things that in the western part of this country you are granted by dint of you getting the God tier rights of being homeless.
This is one of those heaven and earth moments.
Governor Newsom declared a state of emergency, freeing up red tape on what could be a complicated situation for money needed to fix things, and said the state is already on the case.
We've already identified 2 million pounds of steel that is available to move in real time.
So the supply chain issue specific to steel is not an impediment in the short term.
Now, I find this to be incredibly interesting, and by the way, this was an aspect of the cleanup story that I didn't really go over when we talked about that particular area, which is the fact that when Gavin Newsom actually wants to get something done, when something dramatic happens, he always has to suspend the regulatory state. He always has to clear through the red tape in order to get something built, and this is because in California, any kind of construction project, even a repair like this, ultimately ends up getting bogged down by environmental regulations and other regulations that people need to review and rubber stamp and then pivot to another department so that they could be reviewed, and maybe you're going to check a box that gets turned back to the first department, and all this nonsense that prevents anything from being built. But just like in the San Francisco case, where all of a sudden they had the power to clean up the streets, get rid of the homeless people, it turns out Gavin Newsom could suspend it for this scenario because this scenario makes him look bad in order to do the cleanup, even though he refused to do so for all these other scenarios or when your business is under threat.
LADOT officials said, first and foremost, if you're impacted by this, consider public transportation and or plan your routes in advance.
So the city of Los Angeles is recommending public transportation as an alternative to this portion of the highway. As I said, it's a major thoroughfare. 300,000 cars daily go on this, and public transportation in the city of Los Angeles is objectively garbage, so I don't think that's going to be a solution. And the other thing that they said is plan around this. You know, just plan around the idea that a homeless encampment is going to lead to a mega arson that's going to destroy the structural soundness of an overpass that everybody needs to drive on in order to get from the eastern portion of the city to the western portion of the city, because, you know, that's standard fare, standard operating procedure, and that's just good old-fashioned California governance for you.
Also, if you're in the downtown area,
please stay on the freeway. There are other routes that you can use, including the 5, the 101, and the 110 freeways.
Now, I'm not a traffic doctor. I'm not a traffic scientist. I've never diagnosed a traffic patient. But if you are in the state of California and you already are dealing with traffic in and around the Los Angeles area, and then one of your major thoroughfares goes up in flames, and that has 300,000 cars moving on it on a daily basis, then maybe, just maybe, closing that indefinitely, taking all this time to rebuild it, fix it up, make it structurally sound, and telling people to take alternative routes is not exactly going to be the best possible solution for those people. Maybe that's going to be creating traffic in other places, making the city even more disastrous. But again, I say this as somebody who's not a traffic doctor, who's never seen a traffic patient. Now look, I know that the Republican primary process is ongoing right now, and the guy that I'm going to mention is a candidate in that process, and a lot of people have a lot of negative feelings towards him because a lot of people are supportive of President Trump, and I'm sure that's true in my audience. But let's set that aside for a second so I can talk about one of the things that I found most impressive about Ron DeSantis as the governor of Florida. And I talk about this a lot. I mention it in debates, and it's because it's so unusual in the United States of America. When the hurricane hit in the Florida Keys and a particular bridge was damaged and it needed to be rebuilt, Ron DeSantis and the Florida government mobilized and rebuilt that bridge within 72 hours, within 3 days. We don't do stuff like that in the United States of America. Typically, when infrastructure crumbles or goes under or gets set ablaze by a homeless encampment that's just living under there because they have a divine right to commit arson in the state of California, that is something that gets closed indefinitely. That's something that is basically going to be dealt with the way that California deals with it, because we have so much red tape that makes that the impossible. This is one of the reasons why I was so high on Ron DeSantis in terms of his potential presidential prospects, and at some point in the future, maybe if he decides to run down the road, I think he'll be good at the job, even though his campaign doesn't seem to be all that good, because he's actually good at governing, which is something that is rare for a Republican at the executive position. And by the way, me saying this is not about actually praising Ron DeSantis, although he does deserve praise for the way that he governed Florida, in my opinion, but it's about condemning the United States of America and the way that we bog down everything in red tape. the Empire State Building was completed in a year. A bunch of the historic landmarks and monuments with way worse technology were completed way faster, and I fear that this I-10 interchange is going to be out of commission for a lot longer than people can imagine, because it's the state of California, because this is the new America where nothing ever gets built without so much graft and red tape and environmental impact studies that they're going to be screwed for a long period of time. Remember the toilet story out of San Francisco, $1.7 million to build one public toilet. They then had a company offer to do it for free, but even for them, it cost hundreds of thousands into the $1 million range to give San Francisco one public toilet. That's the new America. That's the California regulatory system. And if you have to deal with this traffic, I feel incredibly sorry for you, because they're not likely to fix this anytime soon.
The space under the freeways is often leased by local and state government. Money goes to help public transportation and state highway funds. They get a lot of money from those leases, but say, in this case, the leasee is being sued for not following the contract and subcontracting their space.
They're in violation of their lease. We're in litigation. Their lease is expired. And we have been aggressive.
They talk about how for extra money, they end up leasing out the space under freeways in order to get that revenue to pay for the generalized transportation fund, which, by the way, is always a boondoggle and is always a way to spend money on trains and buses that are never going to be popular, that are total wastes of money, while not fixing the roads. And the thing is, in California, you should have good roads because they have good weather. It's not like New York City or in the Northeast or in the Midwest, where you have to throw salt on the road constantly, which degrades the road in order to fight the snow. You should be able to do that, and now you have all this extra money, but apparently their lease was already in violation, and now they're suing them over them subcontracting their lease or whatever. But if we're being perfectly honest, this is just Gavin Newsom trying to scapegoat this company, whether they violated their terms of their lease by subcontracting or not, because even if you have a lease and you're a private company and you declare that you have control over it, the fact of the matter is California will still allow homeless people to camp under there, and I betcha that they're going to be somewhat connected to the origin of this blaze.
Saturday's explosive fire, believed to be purposely set, engulfed a pallet yard under I-10, even torching a fire truck. Guardrails melted, chunks of concrete fell to the ground, and exposed layers of rebar.
Now, by the way, even though I mentioned throughout the course of this video that the homeless encampment likely has some connection to this blaze, I need to tell you that the state of California and the New York Times and other mainstream media outlets will say that there is no evidence at this moment in time that the homeless encampment had anything to do with anything. In fact, the homeless encampment doesn't even exist. There was no homeless encampment there prior to the blaze, according to the mainstream media and according to some in the California government. Now, Gavin Newsom actually visited 2 separate homeless encampments in this very spot in July.
Just last year, the governor was next to this very section of the Santa Monica Freeway, working to clear large homeless encampments.
But that visit was to move people into shelters, so obviously there were no homeless people encamped underneath this part of the bridge or whatever, so don't worry about it. Now, they're also reporting that the 16 homeless people that were in and around that area have been relocated to shelters, but even though they've been relocated from the encampment, I just want you to know that the state of California's official position is that there was, in fact, no encampment, and those 16 people being relocated from the encampment that definitely was there are being relocated from a different encampment due to a different I-10 fire, I guess. Now look, obviously on this channel we leave all options on the table, and whether or not this encampment was an encampment and the people from the encampment that doesn't exist were relocated is not really the issue at hand. The point being is that I think it is very likely that the fire was related, and by the way, aided by the materials and whatnot in the homeless encampment that the state of California is denying that actually exists. And of course, aided by the garbage and all that. And just because there were 16 or so people living under the bridge doesn't necessarily mean that that was the person or any of the people behind the arson came from that group of people. It could have been a whole other issue. We've covered stories about a fire on the Seattle highway, which was actually set by a different group of homeless people that were targeting that particular encampment. it gets really crazy, and I will update you, but leave your options open. Don't necessarily blame the homeless right off the bat until we have proof positive that that is in fact the case. Also, I cannot wait for them to release the person who committed this arson within days due to the fact that California doesn't really send anybody to prison anymore. But hey, those are just my thoughts, so let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the I-10 Blaze. Till next time.